Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. What are you to do when your husband does not agree with the church teachings that we have around sex and intimacy, these bounds that we have around the sexual act, as well as things like natural family planning and contraception? This is a huge question, and I am so excited to be answering this question and this topic with an amazing special guest, Sarah Bartell, who is a moral theologian who specializes in marriage and sex. So let's jump into the episode. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy. My name is Ellen Holloway. I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. And joining me today, as I mentioned before, is Dr. Sarah Bartell. Let's get into it. I'm going to let you introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yes, I am Sarah Bartell. I have a doctorate in moral theology, specifically focusing on marriage, family life, and sexuality from the Catholic University of America. And for the last 15 years, I have been involved in marriage ministry and have my own Cana Feast ministry that I run with my husband that supports Catholic married couples in renewing their love and growing in their connection and feeling more joyful and happy in their marriage. And then I also have my own course on sex for Catholic women called My Delight, in which I help Catholic wives and brides-to-be learn how to have a happy, holy sex life with their husbands, whether they're suffering low libido or their husband's low libido, or there's just so many different issues and challenges that come up. And we talk about lots of them in my course. So that's mostly what I've been doing these days. I've been married 24 years and I'm the mother of 5 children, ages 4 through 20 this year.
Oh, it's awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. Whenever Sarah comes on the podcast, we always dig into the deep moral issues and ask lots of questions because Sarah is such a wealth of knowledge in this area. And we don't have that many people speaking into the difficulties in this area and answering these kinds of questions. And so today we're going to really be talking specifically about what to do when your husband doesn't agree with the church teaching when it comes to these bounds that we have around sex. So whether it be with NFP, we're going to be talking about that abstinence during the fertile window, as well as kind of the question for people who don't trust in the church teachings and believe in the church teaching, the question about, why do we need to finish with penis in vagina? Why does ejaculation need to happen at that moment? Why can't it happen elsewhere? And those kinds of things. And we're really going to be speaking into, this is really an episode for you if whether or not your husband is Catholic, if you have this tension around this issue and you're just really feeling like your husband is not agreeing with church teaching. And so we're hopefully going to give you that language to use to be able to explain that and talk a little bit about, your role in, your marriage and that kind of thing and in this issue. So
yes, so important.
Obviously really easy things to talk about.
Right. Oh goodness. But so real. I know there are so many marriages where this really is a source of tension and husband wants to do XYZ behavior that actually is not really respecting the authentic meaning of sexuality as we understand it in the Catholic Church.
Exactly.
Right.
Let's start out with just kind of laying some foundation of really, why is it that the church teaches that, the male ejaculation needs to happen inside of the woman and why it can't happen elsewhere and why abstinence is necessary if you're trying to avoid pregnancy.
So yes, let's start with the authentic meaning of sexuality as we understand it in the church through reason and revelation. The meaning of sex is it has to have and integrate the unitive and procreative functions, ends of sexuality. Both have to be present in every sex act. That means that you're not doing something on purpose to block the procreative end. And also it must be fully unitive. So penis and vagina, that is the full physical union. And then husband's climax inside the wife's vagina, that gives the act its procreative potential. Now, even if the wife is already pregnant or postmenopausal, or, they know for 100% certain they're infertile, it's still the kind of act that by its structure could be procreative if fertility were present. That's the kind of act that is also the only kind of act that is fully unitive.
Mm-hmm.
That's why penis and vagina climax for a husband is super crucial, because that's when the sperm comes out and their two bodies are joined. And, there's that procreative possibility there. Yeah. And doing anything to thwart or purposely block that, be it contraception, be it pulling out, be it stimulation to climax for husband manually or orally, so that his climax happens not inside his wife's vagina. All those things separate the procreative and unitive functions, ends, meanings of the sex act. And that's why it's not licit. That's why it's not morally licit.
I think one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, but even if procreation isn't possible, my wife is infertile and these other things feel unitive to me. How come that's not okay?
Right? Because it's not just a unitive thing only. That's not what sex is for. It's not just for unitive. To be fully unitive is also the kind of act that could be procreative. God didn't give us sex just for pleasure, though pleasure is an important part of it. And so to seek sexual pleasure outside a full sexual act that includes husband's penis and wife's vagina climax, that's not respecting the true purpose of sexual pleasure, which is to crown the couple's union with joy as they celebrate their sacrament through their physical union.
I've got another question for you along the same lines. And I also have an answer for you for this question. So I want to hear your answer, and then I'm going to give my own. But another one is kind of relating to natural family planning and needing to avoid pregnancy, which would mean a long period of abstinence in some cases. Like some women's cycles are kind of wonky, hard to track. Yeah. When there's a particularly long period of abstinence. And a sentiment that I have heard from both sides, from women and men, is I just don't understand why God would call us to be separate for so long. Can you speak into that at all?
Yeah, and God is not calling you to be separate. You should absolutely be working on many different forms of your whole person intimacy, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, you should be really working on connecting, and also physical to the degrees that are appropriate. And by that, I mean anything that is not purposely trying to arouse each other sexually during a time when you've decided you're not going to have sex because you've discerned you need to, it's best to avoid pregnancy in that time. God doesn't want you to be separate. You should absolutely be together. And sex is not the only way to be together. So you may be challenged to grow in your emotional intimacy and finding, ways to feel physically close that are not sexually stimulating, like maybe nice back rubs, maybe holding hands, maybe cuddles fully clothed on the couch while you're wearing your full body zip up, footy pajamas. Right. But yeah, be close, be physical in ways that are not arousing or that aren't purposely arousing. Or like if you accidentally get aroused, you can handle it and you're not going to continue to prolong that. Yeah. So, right. So no mutual masturbation or masturbating one or other party of the marriage, one or other spouse. That is not okay during these times. Even if you miss it and it's difficult and challenging to, go so long without sexual stimulation and sexual pleasure. That's part of the cross and it is hard. But what I recommend, first of all, let's just be very clear. And I've consulted with my moral theology mentor, Dr. John Grabowski, who is my dissertation director and, moral theology area supervisor all throughout my graduate studies. He's on the Pontifical Council for the Family. He was appointed to that by Pope Benedict XVI. And he's an expert in theology of the body and, also specialist in morality regarding sexuality. I completely trust him. And he's really well acquainted with not just theology of the body and the church's, what we find in the catechism and canon law, but what's also where a lot of the nitty gritty about, what acts are and are not okay in foreplay. A lot of this has been developed in the church's conversation in the moral theology manuals, which were and still are these are books written to form seminarians and confessors to be able to, give appropriate guidance in the confessional. And this is centuries long tradition that we have in the Catholic Church. That's where a lot of the sexual moral theology kind of has been developed. But like I said, it's not going to be in canon law, whether you are or not allowed to give oral stimulation written up. But the manualists, they have a lot to say about these specific things. So he, just to say, John Grabowski also has read a lot of these and I've been in conversation with him. But anyway, what I'm leading up to is to give this very clear guideline because sometimes it can be vague and couples aren't sure where the line is about what we can do sexually when we are in a time of abstinence. And the guideline is this: you are not to purposely sexually arouse each other during this time. So keep your hands away from each other's private parts and no hands on breasts and things, unless it's a very brief, brief touching or whatnot on the breasts is what I mean. But yeah, hands on each other's genitals, that's really for stimulation and arousal. And the purpose, the point, the end of sexual stimulation and arousal is to prepare the body to consummate with full penis and vagina sexual intercourse. So even if the husband isn't on board with sometimes the husband might not understand or really get it in terms of gosh, the church is teaching so hard, but if they can understand from logic, you wouldn't get into the car, which is in park in the driveway, and turn on the engine and rev it up if you're not going to pull that car out and go on the freeway, right? That's the purpose of getting the engine going and warming the car up so that you can take it for a drive. And that's a little analogy for you are not fulfilling the purpose of sexual arousal if you're purposely arousing each other and not intending to have sex. And it's just revving your body up, revving up your desire and arousal, but then frustrating the natural purpose of that, which first of all is not very kind. It's going to lead to sexual frustration for one or other party. It can lead to sexual brinksmanship. Okay, well, touching each other with hands is, maybe a couple might erroneously think that is okay. Then, a little something slips out here or there, and now they're, have some genital contact. But they end up going a bit further than they intend to. Maybe husband enters for a bit, right? And then they feel really guilt. Then one or other spouse's conscience might ping them or wait, I think we probably went too far. Now I feel guilty. Now I need to go confession. And guilt is not a good fruit. They did go too far. I will be clear. That was too far. I've even had a couple email me, a wife, and she's well, we just don't come to climax. He penetrates and we have sex, but not to climax because we're abstaining. And I had to tell her, I'm sorry, that's not abstaining. That is, the line was way before there. That is not
because sex actually doesn't need to involve climax. The reason why we typically talk about, or orgasm, actually, I'm sorry, let me use the correct language here. the male ejaculation is the moral component that needs to happen within the vagina. In 99.5% of men, ejaculation and climax happen simultaneously. There is a very small percentage of men where those don't happen simultaneously, but for the most part, they happen simultaneously. But the morality of the act has nothing to do with the male orgasm. It has everything to do with ejaculation. And so, like, sex can happen absolutely without orgasm. That is not a required component.
Oh, yeah. Morally speaking, if he were
morally speaking,
without orgasm. Yeah. And here's the thing. Most men have some pre-ejaculate fluid that is released before their orgasm. So maybe you thought that you were, you were avoiding his sperm leaving his body, but actually it kind of slips out a bit before orgasm anyway. And so then you have a situation like if in this couple's case where they were like, well, we're abstaining because we're not, going all the way to his climax when he's penetrating in me. And I had to, say like, actually, no, I'm not abstaining anyway. But then also if their intention is to avoid pregnancy, they are acting in a way that is logically directly against that intention.
Exactly.
So it's
biologically speaking, like pregnancy can occur from mere genital contact. Not even entrance. Sperm are tiny.
In the neighborhood of the vaginal opening. That sperm can get over there. It's
in a cubic centimeter of seminal fluid, there's like 10 to 400 million, like 10 million to 400 million sperm in a cubic centimeter. Like they are very numerous and very, very small, so just biologically, that does not compute and doesn't work.
Right. And like just arousing each other without intending to culminate in the proper way. It's imprudent, and prudence is a virtue, and the opposite of virtue is vice. It's using our sexual faculties and abilities and capacities contrary to the purpose for which they were made. So I hope that just the illogic of that could make sense to husbands who are not necessarily on board just by virtue of the church's authority or just wanting to, trust or adhere to the church's teaching. You can just see from logic. But anyway, there's just so many bad fruits that come from this: frustration, guilt, a surprise pregnancy. Child is always a blessing, but the couple may be quite dismayed to find themselves with a surprise pregnancy when their intention was to avoid pregnancy. So, just doing things with your genitals with each other like that could lead to a pregnancy, even if you don't all the way, have penetration. So what I advise couples to do, first of all, observe that clear boundary. Don't sexually stimulate each other when you're in a time of abstinence. This can be a hard saying. This is a narrow gate. This is not the road that's easy and broad, right? But what I've seen time and time again, when I have recommended this to couples who have asked me about this, to wives specifically, and then they share it with their husbands. And, sometimes either the wife or the husband or both are like, this is really, they don't like hearing this. Then when they apply themselves sincerely to observing that, what they find can be so much peace, so much clarity. Then in one case, I had a wife who would recoil at her husband's touch during the fertile period when they were abstaining because he would want to make out and get handsy and get canoodly and do lots of stimulation. And she was experiencing this recoil and physical pain even, and like was averse to her husband touching her. And then once they learned this boundary and observed it, she was able to relax. Her husband did observe that. And then she was able to feel peace. And then they were able to connect and, be physically affectionate in ways that were not sexual, where she didn't feel, even on this deep subconscious level, that her body knew and her nervous system is picking up on and acting towards that, she had to protect herself from his touch, right? So what you can do instead, you can channel and use that energy to do something beautiful together that serves your marriage and your family instead of making love. if you got a little extra energy, maybe this is the time to clean out the attic or the garage, or stay up late and plan out the design for your dream kitchen makeover or your dream vacation, or you guys pour yourselves into some yard work, or, you can do things that help build a beautiful life together that show that you're serving each other or God. Like maybe you pray extra during this time, and maybe you need to pray extra for the grace, right? To avoid temptation during this time. But this is what happened with a couple that were in this situation where I had told the wife about this clear boundary, and she passed it on to her husband. He was really upset at first, but then thanks to the grace of God, he was able to sit with it. And then he realized a lot of what he was looking for when he was kind of reaching for his wife and wanting to get, stimulating and handsy during this time actually was like the ache in his heart for God. That was like, he really decided to apply himself to more prayer during that time. And he really did step up and serve his family more, like extra housework and yard work and projects. And then she was so thankful and happy. And it's really led to these beautiful flowering of good fruits in their marriage. So that's what I recommend, is what else can you do together instead of making love that can build your life? Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that we talk a lot about on this podcast is that sex should be the fruit of a deeply intimate relationship. It should not be the glue that holds your relationship together. Okay. And so if you are called to abstain for a long amount of time, then that actually is a huge flag for you that there is intimacy missing in your relationship, that intimacy outside of the bedroom that needs to be fostered. And so that's just you can just know that immediately. If this long period of abstinence is taking a very big toll on your marriage, then it's okay, I actually know the exact answer. It means that we need to foster intimacy in emotional ways, in intellectual ways, in spiritual ways, and build our relationship more in these other ways to kind of fill up that intimacy need so that sex can be that beautiful fruit. But my answer to that question of, I don't think God would ever call a husband and wife to, be apart for that long, to abstain for that long. And this is my quippy answer, but look, the holiest marriage that we know of, the holiest family that we know of, never had sex. Mary and Joseph were not called to a sexual relationship, right? And that is the holiest family that we know of, the holiest marriage that we know of. And we can look to that marriage for guidance and grace and look at the virtues that were built in that beautiful marriage that had no sex, none whatsoever, right? And so, yeah, actually, God might be calling you to abstain for a very long time. He very well might be calling you to do that because that's what he called Mary and Joseph to do. Now, I'm not saying that means forever, but it's just, in general, it is a little bit silly to be oh, I don't think God would call us to abstain for that long. Well, actually, he definitely could. And he has in the past. He's shown that he has asked that of couples.
There's also, do you know this couple, Luigi and Maria Quattrochi? They are, I think they're either servants of God or they're blessed. And in their marriage, they actually lived abstinence for about 40 years by choice. They're born in the late 1800s, and then they died in Luigi died in 1951 and Maria died in 1965. They were Italian. I think they lived in Rome. And this is just part of their particular call to holiness that they responded to generously. They chose to avoid sex after a certain point in their marriage. So they could be a couple that you could turn to if you're in one of these long sex dry spells for okay, how do we stay close and loving and affectionate? I need some help from heaven. This couple, they could be that help. And I would not say that very many couples are called to such a radical
renunciation. That's definitely very radical.
Right? Yeah. And I think it's totally possible to be a really holy couple and, make love a lot more than that. But there can be times when just the circumstances are such that it's going to be a long time without sex. And, how do you live this without resentment and bitterness? And how do you live it with joy? And, especially when you're not equally on board, that can be really hard. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think during times like this, it can be really great to remember to build your emotional intimacy in ways where you can remember together, go reminisce, think about your best times you've had in your marriage while cuddling in a platonic way, or dream together, or ask each other open-ended questions. So you get to really discover each other deeper and deeper. What are your husband or your wife's interests? What's on their heart these days? Who do they admire most and why? Ask them about their hobbies and what specifically about those hobbies or interests that they follow, enter into their world a bit more. That can be a way to really unite and get inside each other in a sense by just getting inside each other's worlds and hearts.
We'll be back with the episode in just a minute. Let me ask you a quick question. Does sex just kind of suck? Or maybe you and your husband are just always arguing about sex? Maybe you feel like your libido has disappeared, or it takes you too long to get aroused, or you just really don't like sex that much and you're ready for that to not be an issue in your life anymore. If that sounds like you, then you need the Catholic Sex Course for Women. In this course, we dive into the 5 pillars of married sex, and I help you actually finally have the sex life that you have dreamed of. Sex is so good. It is so holy, and you deserve to actually enjoy and find pleasure in your sex life. Check out the Catholic Sex Course for Women at vinesinfullbloom.com/Catholic sex, or click the link in the show notes. Yeah. So let's transition now into the kind of more difficult situation of, my husband has just flat out said, I don't believe what the church teaches, and I'm not going to follow it. And what is a wife to do in that situation? Maybe the husband is not Catholic and has no kind of moral obligation or kind of understanding of the church teaching. Or maybe the husband is Catholic, but just has really put a hard line of I'm just not. I'm going to wear a condom. I'm not going to follow this NFP thing. Or I'm just going to pull out and you can't stop me, kind of a thing.
Yeah. And that is really difficult. And I think that it's important to know that you need to make it clear to your husband that you are opposed to that you wish to make love in a way that honors God and the authentic meaning of sexuality. But if he decides, though, that he's going to do something that is his action on his end that is opposed, so pulling out or wearing a condom, you can still make love with your husband as long as you've made known, I don't agree with that and I wish you wouldn't. And you are praying for him and, every now and then, trying to have a conversation about this and trying to lead him towards the truth. You can still have sex with him. So there is this vademecum for confessors concerning some aspects of the morality of conjugal life that the church has put out. So this is advice to confessors for, how to handle these certain delicate aspects that can come up in a couple's sex life. And paragraph 13 of this addresses some special difficulties are presented by cases of cooperation. They're referring to what we talk about in moral theology of cooperation with evil. So I'm continuing to read. Cooperation in the sin of a spouse who voluntarily renders the unitive act infecund. Okay, so this would be putting on a condom or pulling out. In the first place, it is necessary to distinguish cooperation in the proper sense from violence or unjust imposition on the part of one of the spouses, which the other spouse, in fact, cannot resist. I think they're talking about rape here, is what I read, or anyway.
Coercive, definitely coercive acts.
Coercive. Then the vademecum continues by saying, this cooperation can be licit when the 3 following conditions are jointly met. So they're saying here, you can have sex with your husband, even if he's doing something that's against church teaching, like pulling out or putting on a condom. if these three conditions are in place. When the act of the cooperating spouse is not already illicit in itself. Well, it's not illicit to have sex with your husband. That's the action you're choosing, is making love with your beloved spouse. That is actually a good thing to do. And that's the act that you're choosing, right? Then number 2, when the proportionately grave reason exists for cooperating in the sin of the other spouse. Well, by having sex with him, like that is allowing him on his end to engage in the sin of pulling out or using a condom, right? Or maybe he's gotten a vasectomy, right? But if you were to totally abstain and be like, well, I'm not having sex with you, husband, because you're doing this bad thing, but then that would put such a pressure in your marriage, such a tension that it would really be a harm in your marriage. That would be a grave reason. Like that would be that would be such a bad thing, that tension, that it's worth it to, go along and sex with the husband. I'm just paraphrasing here. And then the third thing, when one is seeking to help, the third condition, when one is seeking to help the other spouse to desist from such conduct, patiently with prayer, charity, and dialogue, although not necessarily in that moment nor every single occasion. So you don't have to say every single time that you're making love with your husband, like, I really, wish you wouldn't be pulling out, or it pains me so much that you had the vasectomy. I sure wish you'd get it reversed. Or, you don't have to say it every single time, but it should be like a slow-mo ongoing, conversation that you do bring up periodically while also praying for him. Okay, so that is kind of the guidance we have from the church there. So it's his sin if he is doing those things. Now, if he's like telling you should take the pill, honey, or you should give me a hand job or a blow job, and I'll be pouty and coercive, or, whatever, if you don't, then it's still not okay. It's not morally illicit for you, the wife, to do those things, because then you are taking the action that is illicit, and you can't do that.
Yes. Yeah, I think the big thing here to really remember is that third point of that, like, if this is your situation, like, at no point should you just like accept that this is how it's always going to be and just like be like, whatever, this is just, I'm just never going to be able to change it. Like your cooperation in this morally illicit act, like in order to try to get it to a point where it's not morally illicit, right, is that you are like constantly in prayer, praying for your husband to see the truth in what you're sharing with him, and then regularly sharing that, right? And it said it doesn't have to be like every single time or
at
in that exact moment. Yeah. But like that this should be a regular conversation. If this is what's going on in your marriage, then and regular is going to look different for every person, but that might mean as often as once a week, once a month, like really, really regularly talking about these things. And again, that's going to look different for every couple, but just never kind of resigning yourself to like, well, my husband's just not Catholic and he's just never going to get there with this whole moral thing. I've heard countless stories from you guys, you guys listening, of, oh my gosh, yeah, we were using condoms for years and I just continued to pray about it. And my husband's still not Catholic, but we use NFP now and he's on board with it. He doesn't love it, but like just countless stories of that your prayer, your intercession for your husband is so powerful. We just cannot like discount how powerful that prayer is. And then just that regular kind of conversation, that regular reminding, like, look, I don't like that you pull out. I don't want you to pull out. Or I think sometimes what can be really helpful too is particularly acts that are done during the fertile window is being very clear of, okay, hun, I hope you understand that we're trying to avoid pregnancy right now. And I am in my fertile window, and any kind of genital contact, whether it's contact and then pulling out or contact with a condom, like can result in a pregnancy. So if we really want to avoid pregnancy, like we really shouldn't do this. Speaking from that biological side can sometimes be really helpful. And that's just one tiny example, but we kind of talked a lot about that earlier. And so I think that's one of the big things to really keep in mind here about that particular issue.
Oh, yeah. And I would also encourage, like you said, there's such power in prayer, and it can be a long game. It's so fair, but it really can. Powerful results. And I would say that you can add little regular sacrifices as well. Like maybe it's some ongoing little sacrifice, like you love cream and sugar in your coffee or tea, and you just decide like, you know what, I'm just going to give that up for this intention, or some little thing like that, like maybe the first 2 minutes of my shower, I'm going to have a cold shower or something, just some little tiny sacrifice that is regular and recurring in your daily life for this. Okay, I'm going to bring up another holy couple, which is Blessed Stavros and Cyprian Rugamba. Have you heard about them, Ellen?
I don't think so.
Oh, they are so amazing. They are from Rwanda, and they were killed in the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. And Stavros, the wife, was a super fervent Catholic rosary prayer, and her husband had fallen away from the faith and mocked. He was not on board with the Catholic faith, and he did allow her to raise the kids Catholic, but he himself was not a good husband. He cheated on her for a long, long time, and this was really hard for her, but she just prayed the rosary all the time and just prayed her heart out. And guess what? He almost died of this illness, but then was dramatically healed in an unexplained way. And he said, I know I was healed because I know who did it. It was your God that you pray to all the time. And then he asked her forgiveness and became a really good husband to her and was really affectionate. Now, then, held her hand all the time and whatnot. So I have interviewed their living son. Most of their children were killed with them during the genocide because they were there at home when the killers came. But one of 2 or 3 children were not, including their oldest son. And I was able to interview him because he speaks French and I speak French, and it was just really powerful. But anyway, it was just amazing to hear his perspective on their parents' marriage before and after. And he told me that their mom was known as just the lady with the rosary lady, because she had it around her hands all the time. And she just kept praying it all throughout the day, all the time. So turn to the rosary. And these powerful conversions do happen. And you could be the next story like this.
Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much for all of your insight into this area. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of add in about this whole topic of, one spouse not agreeing with church teaching? Anything else that you wanted to add in before we close out?
Gosh, I think just maybe based on a lot of, what I've encountered in working with women, but also what I've read on NFP forums, like on Facebook and whatnot, there can just be so much coercion that happens sort of in that medium level between, really overt like pressure and like, being okay. Like, I guess I just want to talk to the wives whose husbands get really pouty or sulky or, distant when the wife doesn't do what the husband wants sexually. And I want to encourage you to not be manipulated by that. You can call it out. You can say, that like what a turnoff that is to you, that it makes you not want to make love with him when he's that way, that you will feel more free and close to him and united to him if he can be a gentleman and gracious, in how he responds to the boundaries, that you hope that he will respect your conscience. And that's part of who you are. And he loves you. And this is a really key part of you, right? And so that's a way that he can honor and love you. And also, I wanted to also speak to those times when it's a super long absence period and you're both missing making love, that you can say that. And that can be a way that you can grow closer. It's just, you can like without bitterness or reproach on either side, but you can just say, oh, it is hard. I miss you in that way. I miss being with you in that way. This is really long. And, you can just say that. That is part of emotional intimacy, is to express the challenges that you're going through together. And, and then to encourage each other through it. Be like, but we're in this together, and, and I love you, and this is a beautiful life we have together, and this is part of living it out. And, I'm happy to I'm so glad that you're the one that I get to live this with.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's worth. I hope that can help someone out there.
Oh, I think that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. And there's going to be links in the show notes of how to find Sarah and what she's up to. And so just check out the show notes if you're like, I loved everything that I heard and I want more of Sarah Bartell.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.